Hello and welcome to the FATBOSS guide to Sire Denathrius in Castle Nathria.
This last boss is probably one of the hardest last bosses we've seen in the past few expansions. The encounter is stacked with mechanics, many of them one-shots, and throughout you must perform a well choreographed dance to deal with most of the abilities thrown at you. Anyway, there's a lot to talk about, so let's start with phase 1.
Immediately on the pool, your entire raid will gain Burden of Sin stacks. You'll have 4 on normal and 5 on heroic. Your objective in this phase is to push the boss to 70% health, whilst reducing the entire raid stacks to 2. This is done by standing in the boss's cleansing pain cone. On the pool, you'll want to drag the boss towards the wall and you'll be tanking him near them for the majority of phase 1. When the cone is cast, you'll want to face him inwards. You'll want to split your raid into 2, rotating each group of players to get hit by the cone each time. For each player hit by the cone, you'll spawn an ad, and this is one of the reasons why you'll only want half your raid to get hit. These are immune to crowd control and pulse damage on the entire raid. You want to cleave and nuke them down the moment they spawn. These ads will often overlap with the Night Hunter debuff. 2 players will be targeted with a beam connecting them to an untargetable ad. Shortly afterwards, the ad will rush towards them and deal lethal damage that is reduced by having players stand within your beam. It's important that soaking players do not stand within the circle around the targeted player, as this will heal the boss. It's also important not to stand in the cross where the beams from 2 players meet, as getting hit by both of them will one-shot you. You'll want the majority of your raid involved in soaking these lines just to keep it safe. On normal, you won't get these lines, and instead, people will just get targeting circles that they need to move out with. The second reason you'll only want half the raid to get hit by the cleansing pain is because of blood price. When this is cast, it will lift the entire raid into the air and deal a burst of damage to you. This damage scales on how many other players in the raid have the same amount of Burden of Sin stacks as you. So if no one aside from the tank is hit by the very first cleansing pain cone, the entire raid will have the exact same amount of stacks and will simply just be one shot. By having half the raid on different amount of stacks each time this ability comes in, this damage becomes survivable. The boss will cast a cleansing pain into a blood price into another cleansing pain, and then will cast Ravage. This will cause a third of the room to be coated in ticking damage. You'll want to move towards the middle of the room just before this is cast so it's easier to move from, and using movement speed increases here is a good idea. The boss will snap to the tank's location throughout the fight, so moving him is extremely easy. From here, the fight repeats, cleansing pain into another blood price, into another cleansing pain, into a Ravage. You'll want to repeat this dance until only 1/3 of the room is remaining, at which point you'll want to push the boss into phase 2. When doing this, you may need to stop DPS so you definitely get the last cleansing pain cone after the 3rd blood price. If you push before this point, you're going to have players with 3 Burden of Sin stacks, which will likely kill them. Once you've pushed the boss, he'll start his transition into phase 2. He'll jump into the middle of the room, throw you to the edges, and create a large zone that hard silences you. Your movement speed here is reduced by the amount of Burden of Sin stacks you have. If you have 3, you won't be able to make it to the middle, and you'll die once the transition has ended. 2 stacks, however, will allow you to reach the middle in time. Now, whilst this is only probably relevant for Mythic, some classes and Covenants can completely cheese this. If just before the transition, Shaman's going to Ghost Wolf, they can reach the middle even with 5 stacks. DKs can also go with 5 if they're running the Death's Advance passive. If you Night Fae Fox form just before the transition, this will allow you to go in with 3 stacks. And Priests can life grip targets with any amount of stacks once they've made it into the middle. Doing these little things will make raid damage on the raid lower throughout phase 1, as you'll have more varying stack numbers for the blood price, and also have less ad spawning from each cleansing pain. Regardless of how you decide to do it, once you've made your way to the middle, the boss will drag you downstairs and phase 2 will begin.
Now once you've landed, you want to take the boss to the north side of the room where 4 ads will spawn, as well as the sword. This phase, similar to phase 1, has its own repeating dance that you'll need to perfect, but we'll explain how all the mechanics work first. At the start and on a timer, Cabalists will spawn throughout phase 2. The first set are at the north, 2 on the main platform and 2 on the sides. The second set spawn mirrored south, 2 on the main and 2 on the sides, and the third set with our strategy you should never see, but if you do, you have 2 ads spawn in the east and 2 in the west, all on the main platform. These ads do nothing but deal ticking damage to the entire raid. Whilst you could technically leave some of these up since the damage isn't very high, any Cabalists remaining in phase 3 will reduce healing done by the raid by 15% each, so it's important to stay on top of them. Now importantly, on heroic, when they die they'll also spawn blood pools under every player. If you're hit by these swirlies, you take a burst of damage and will be likely knocked off the platform to your death. This can overlap with other abilities, making it impossible to deal with, so it's important that ads die at certain times, which we'll cover in a moment. Now throughout this phase, the boss will hit the tanks with racking pain. This long narrow cone deals a burst of damage and debuffs all targets hit with 50% increased damage for 24 seconds. You want to taunt on one and make sure you're facing it away from the raid, off the edge of the platform. You can direct this towards any Cabalist ads as well, as it'll also take the damage increase taken debuff. You also want to be taunt swapping on Remornia, the big sword. she'll apply a stacking bleed that you'll want to swap around the 4 stack mark. This is made slightly easier for the tanks as the sword will occasionally stop attacking when she casts Impale. This is targeted at 3 players with lines showing the direction the sword is about to charge through. Each player's hit, including anybody else en route, takes a large burst of damage and gets a dot, and on heroic you'll also spawn puddles underneath yourself which deal ticking damage. So if targeted you want to try and keep to the edge of the platforms and stand still whilst everyone else moves out of the path. This sword will also completely disappear from the encounter and cast Massacre. Over 10 seconds or so, the sword will rush across the platform multiple times, dealing massive damage to anyone caught, one-shotting anyone really without a large damage reduction. You want to be pre-spread as much as you can for this, as each line is actually targeted towards a single player. If you're stacked close to melee, it can be very difficult to find a safe spot. Afterwards, the sword will return, and you want to continue to cleave it as the damage that it takes is also shared by the boss. Last to mention on the ability list of this phase is the Hand of Destruction. This spawns a shadow copy near the boss that will grip everyone in and shortly afterwards explode, dealing massive raid-wide damage, but it's reduced by distance. Each time this goes off, you immediately want to take the nearby mirror to teleport you to the direct opposite side of the room. Alright, so that's what you're dealing with, let's show you how it's done. After moving north, you want to kill the 2 main adds on the platform, whilst ranged DPS get the adds on the side platform low, but importantly they don't kill them yet. When the first shadow copy comes, you'll take the mirror to the other side of the room. You stay here and wait for the Impale. Once the targets are chosen, you can top them up, throw some hots on them, and then everyone else can go through the mirror again. The Impale targets will then take it afterwards. You'll then get a Massacre, and immediately afterwards you want to kill the adds on the side platforms. This is a far safer time to kill them than previously, as otherwise you'll be nuking them during the first Hand of Destruction grip, which will spawn goo everywhere and likely kill you. After they're dead, you'll get your second grip in, take the mirror to the other side, and you'll get your second set of adds. You just want to nuke the main platform adds again, whilst any range get the side adds low. You'll get your third Hand of Destruction, go through the mirror, and then you want to push the boss to 40% to go into phase 3 before the next adds spawn.
In this phase you'll have to use the middle of the room as the side platforms are now covered in goo. In this last phase, Denathrius will wield Remornia. This makes him attack 25% slower, but his attacks will do 50% more damage and apply a stacking dot. You'll want to taunt every 6 stacks or so. The start of this phase is probably one of the spiciest parts of the entire fight. You'll want to take the boss to the Cabbalists that now have moved onto the main platform and begin to nuke them down. Meanwhile, everyone will want to be in melee, ready for the first Shattering Pain. This is cast throughout the phase, knocking back the entire raid whilst doing a burst of damage. You need to make sure that you position yourself so you're never knocked off the platform. Immediately afterwards, 3 players are debuffed with Fatal Finesse. These debuffs deal burst of damage to all players within the targeting circle and apply a dot when they expire. Most importantly on Heroic, they'll leave behind a smouldering Ire Orb. These explode after 10 seconds, wiping you. You can however soak them by having players stand within them. This very first set however overlaps with a Hand of Destruction grip in. It's vital that these orbs are pre-placed just outside the Hand of Destruction circle, and you'll want to pre-soak them as much as you can just before the grip comes in. Immediately afterwards, you'll then want to use movement speed increases to get back to them as soon as possible to prevent them from exploding. If you have mages, you'll want them to sit in ice blocks just as the grip happens, as this seems to be the only immunity that stops the grip in effect, giving you some valuable extra soaking time on the orbs. After this first set of orbs is dealt with, you'll then want to move towards the second ad, where you'll get another Shattering Pain knockback, where you'll want to Bloodlust immediately afterwards and nuke down the second ad. Shortly afterwards, you'll get your first Ravage, covering a third of the room, into another knockback, and then you'll get your second and third set of seeds very shortly afterwards. The first set of seeds you'll want to be quite far away from the boss, and then the second set that come immediately afterwards, you'll want to be slightly closer. Ranged and healers will want to deal with the far ones, whilst melee deal with the close ones. Once the ranged ones are done, you'll then want to help the melee ones immediately afterwards. Once they're dealt with, you'll be knocked back again into your first Massacre in this phase that also comes with some seeds. You'll want to do your best to spawn these around the middle of the room or close to the boss, because not too long after the Massacre you will get another knockback, and if these seeds are placed far away from the boss, you're likely going to be knocked off the platform. You'll then get a second Hand of Destruction into another set of seeds. This hurts the debuff players a lot, so you need to make sure that if you are targeted for the seeds here, you use a personal, and healers be ready to spam heal the targets. Afterwards you'll get the second Ravage, which will cover the next third of the room. Instead of running from this, you'll want to use the next knockback from the boss to leave this area, and at the same time this next set of seeds you'll want to place far away. This is because it overlaps with the third Hand of Destruction, very similar to how the first works. This overlap is very rough because you have very little space to work in, so it's at this point you'll probably want to rely on any other immunities that you've got left in the raid just to soak up the orbs while everyone else runs from the Hand of Destruction. After you've managed to survive this point, you'll get another knockback into more seeds that overlap with the second massacre. It's around this point that you'll really want the boss to be killed, because if you go much longer into the fight, you are going to get the third Ravage, and that is simply the hard enrage. But that's the fight. We appreciate it's a long guide, but literally every second of this encounter from start to finish is really important and requires close to perfect execution to actually pull off.
Thanks for watching. If you'd like a refresher on the mechanics of this fight or any of the other fights in the entirety of Castle Nathria, then do go check out our guides over on Wowhead. A link for that can be found in the description below. And before you go, make sure you check out our sponsor CurseForge. Fights like this are made so much easier just by having your add-ons and timers up to date. CurseForge allows you to update all of your add-ons with a single click, as well as quickly search for and install new add-ons, which is so useful when you forgot to get your DBM installed and you're just about to pull a boss. CurseForge is free to use, and a big thing we like about it is that they're constantly looking for feedback to improve the service, whilst also sharing 70% of the revenue they generate with the mod authors. So go show them some love and download it today. We have a list of add-ons that we use for raiding, as well as some handy add-ons for when we're doing other things in Shadowlands. A link for that can be found in the description below, so go have a look. Thanks again for watching, guys. Hopefully these guides were useful, and we'll see you all in the next one.
Take care.